So as he stated, my name is Annabelle O'Reilly, and today I'm presenting on centering community and wildfire resilience. I'm very excited about this topic, and I'm excited to share the inclusive engagement strategies and actionable recommendations I created for my deliverable. So how do I just space? I'm not strong.
You're good.
All right, cool. Thank you. All right, so I just wanted to start with some brief terminology to keep in mind throughout the presentation. So first, CWPPs, these are community wildfire protection plans, and they're essentially a really cool plan for communities in wildfire-prone regions to learn how to successfully live alongside fire. How they work is that they bring together all the local stakeholders and residents to help understand what is most important in that community, and then they map those values against predicted fire behavior in different scenarios. And then finally, they make a plan to address the riskiest and most vulnerable areas over the following 5 years. Next, we have Community Champion. This is a trusted, informal community member who actively supports mitigation efforts. So instead of maybe a more formal person like a fire chief in the area, this is kind of like a friendly neighbor who really cares about fire mitigation and wants to engage people. So this is a key person for practitioners to engage with if they want to build broader community trust. Next, I want to go over some fire ecology terminology. So first we have prescribed fire or burns, and these are a planned fire in a controlled environment. So how they control the environment is by thinning or to thin the area, which is the selective removal of trees. And this is not clear cutting. Clear cutting is when you completely wipe out the area of all trees, and that would destroy the ecosystem. This is like, let's say, take out every other tree, just depending on what the area needs, in order to sustain that ecosystem and maintain those low to moderate intensity fires. All right. I gotta figure this out.
All it is when you're on here, click on that.
Okay, just press here.
Yeah, if you like change off, but it should be good now.
Okay, sweet. Thank you. All right. So a little bit about me and how my background relates to what I've done or the deliverable I created on wildfire mitigation. So a few years ago, I had the opportunity to do an AmeriCorps term where I was able to gain firsthand field experience in conservation and fire mitigation, such as running a chainsaw on public and private lands. And this really allowed me to learn how to engage directly with private landowners and navigate their concerns around wildfire risk and take the steps that they need to protect their properties. During this time, I also had the opportunity to do the TREX program, which is essentially a prescribed fire operations training that includes information sharing and cross-boundary relationship building for people who want to work with fire. So this is, again, another great opportunity for me to learn from peers and learn how to engage community members and how to do prescribed fire on public and private lands. And that's a picture of me there, laying down fire, doing the prescribed fire work. Yeah. Following, I had the opportunity to be a conservation crew lead of a crew experiencing disabilities. And this really taught me the importance of how important inclusivity is in conservation work. And I carry that with me always, and really inspired me to want to do this capstone. And finally, I'm part of the Conservation Leadership Graduate Program right now, which has been really amazing. It's been a great, yeah, it's been a great learning experience. I got to learn the diverse perspectives of my peers and really learn that conservation is people-centric. Okay. All right, I got it this time. All right, so a little bit. Oh, I think someone's in the waiting room. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so a little bit on the topic. I just wanted to provide some brief background before we really get into the meat of it. So inclusivity, community engagement and wildfire mitigation is so important. And that's because there's a huge risk here of potentially excluding critical community members. And this is primarily due to social and demographic factors such as age, mobility, language, income, and seasonal residency. Since inclusive engagement acknowledges diverse perspectives, fosters trust, and builds lasting partnerships, we can address these barriers and strengthen long-term conservation outcomes. And that's a picture of me doing some outreach with the Umber Alliance, engaging community members, and providing information. All right, so what exactly did I create for my deliverable? I created a community engagement guide that's an extension of the updated CWPP. We all know what that means now, right? Community Wildfire Protection Plan for the Red Feather Lakes community, which is this small community just north of Fort Collins here. And I'll get into some social ecological context behind them in a minute and why they're so wildfire prone. But the guide I created is just one part. The other part was tailored just for community Red Feather Lakes primarily, whereas the focus for my guide is meant to be broader and include inclusive engagement strategies and actual recommendations that are ideally adaptable in the future for other communities and also for future updated CWPPs in this area. And then let's get into the Ember Alliance. This is the organization that I created this deliverable for and who is in charge of this updated CWPP. So the Ember Alliance, aka T, their mission is to restore the relationship between communities and fire on the landscape. And I think their logo here really helps represent this. So as you can see on the bottom, they have this fire that's enriching the green that represents the forests and grasslands we love. And then overall, the fingerprint represents the people that steward them. So I just love how it's all together in one logo to represent that this is a mutually beneficial relationship. So a little bit more about who the Ember Alliance is. They're a nonprofit, they're Northern Colorado based, and they have partners nationwide. They have 3 really cool programs. Their first is their fire operations, where they're doing field projects and prescribed fire. And their mission here is learning together and burning together. I know that sounds a little scary, but it's actually great. For example, in 2021, they collaboratively burned over 10,000 acres with more than 15 different agencies and organizations involved. And I don't know, I really admire when people can learn from each other and get work done together. For the next program, it's on resilient communities and ecosystems. So here they're planning, modeling, and facilitating alongside community members on the best way to help them live alongside fire. So this is where those CWPPs come in. And that's what I'm helping out and being a part of right now. And then finally, they have their inclusive training. So this ranges from practitioner training to landowner education and training. And they have beginner and advanced levels. So that includes FFT2, which is your most beginner level firefighter. Then there's TREX, which is that cool program that I mentioned earlier I was part of. And then there's like Burn Boss, which is pretty much the cool person that gets to run the fire truck. So all different expertise here. So now moving on into the social ecological context, I'd love to provide a little reflection piece. When you hear the word wildfire, what is one word that comes to mind? I'll give you 15 seconds to think about it, and then I'd love to ask for a few examples if anyone wants to share. And if you're online, I'd love if you could just write in the chat as well. All right, start 15 seconds. All right, 15 seconds are up. Does anyone have any one words they want to share? Yes. Loss? Yes, that's a really good one. Yes.
Flashover.
Flashover? Nice. Panic. Yeah. Yes.
Danger.
Yep. That's great. Yeah.
Renewal as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really great word.
So you're also getting untamed, danger, natural, succession.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. So I'm hearing primarily negative terms. However, there's also positive here, right? So I would love to focus on how exactly wildfire can be positive. So in the social ecological context, wildfire can shape ecosystems and communities, and this can be in a really positive way. So historically, fire regulates ecological balance. Across the West, there's plenty of ecosystems that really have become reliant on fire because they've co-evolved with fire. However, over time, we've noticed due to long-term fire suppression that by suppressing this fire, it alters the landscape resilience, leading to large, intense, scary wildfires. So historically, we have those nice low to moderate fires that maintain the ecosystem. Now with suppression, we have these big, large wildfires due to overloading of the fuels. And I'll get into a nice example in a second. Climate change also amplifies this risk with rising temperatures and drier climates. However, not all is lost. Communities can adapt through collaboration, which is what we see with CWPPs. All right, so I want to get into this example. As you can see, I have Charlie here from Always Sunny, and he basically in this episode, he's making all these crazy connections, and I'm about to do that right here on fire ecology. So this is an example of a natural systems modification. So naturally, we'd have fire going through the landscape, as you can see here in this black and white photo. This is like mid 1800s. We have this nice, beautiful ecosystem with these large diameter ponderosa pine, and the trees are nice and dispersed. And as you can see, it's not overcrowded. This is ideal. We see a negative feedback loop here of fire coming through and sustaining this ecosystem. And you could tell, I hope you can tell that there's a smaller flame up there to indicate that this is a low to moderate fire that's coming through, and it's not dangerous. This is sustainable. However, with fire suppression, you can see with the crossed out no fire sign in the little tree, we get overgrowth, we get crowding, we get a bunch of trees outcompeting each other for resources such as water and light. And that means that they're more vulnerable to fire. So they are drying out and they're overcrowded. So if fire were to come through, then all of it's going to burn, right? Like fire is going to be able to reach up into the trees. And that is exactly what would happen in this example. This is a hypothetical situation where fire comes through that dense conifer forest and then creates this destructive area where it's no longer sustained by nice low to moderate fires. It's no longer fire resistant. So when fire does come through again, you get these large, intense wildfires that are dangerous and to destroy the ecosystem. Whereas in another scenario, which is primarily sustained with prescribed burns, you have to prep the area now because you have to make sure you take out that overcrowding, right? When fire comes through, it'll go back to that beautiful, pristine ecosystem we want to see with the nice dispersed trees. And then you can see down there with F1 that has the nice low to moderate negative feedback loop again, sustaining that ecosystem. So yeah, now you guys are little experts on fire ecology. Hello. I want to get into the context behind Red Feather Lakes. So again, this is a small community just north of Colorado, and this is the community that my CWPP is made for. So a little ecological context, they are based in Roosevelt National Forest, which is a montane and subalpine region. So we're seeing a lot of Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, a lot of plants that are used to fire. This is also a semi-arid climate. They get about 15 to 20 inches of annual precipitation, meaning they're really dry year-round. And then also this area has had major large wildfires historically, such as the 2020 Cameron Peak fire that burned 208,000 acres around. It didn't luckily get into the community itself, but it was definitely threatened. Overall, all these factors mean that this area or the homes are about 95.5% more likely to be impacted by wildfire than the national average. Scary. So also socially, they're also at risk, unfortunately. So this is a small rural mountain community with about 347 residents currently. They're predominantly older residents as well, with a median age of about 66, and they have high seasonal ownership. This means that only 25% of over 900 housing units are occupied year-round. So that means overall, this equates to large emergency planning challenges. So for example, when practitioners are coming to knock on residents' doors to get fire mitigation work done before fire season, people aren't there. People aren't home, right? So yes, very high risk community, definitely needs the CWPP. So now I want to get into my methodology on how I created my actionable recommendations and inclusive engagement strategies. So I did a mixed methods approach. This included semi-structured interviews with 11 wildfire professionals. This was to capture local expertise, best practices for community engagement, and overall lessons learned. I also included a systematic literature review of peer-reviewed and applied research. And this helped ground my recommendations and strategies in science and best practices. Finally, I also included in-person workshops, data. Like I got to go and attend some and meet with community members directly and get feedback from them and see what they need. And then I also got to use surveys with Red Feather Lakes residents as well to overall incorporate lived experience and local local knowledge. So in its entirety, I was able to do a comprehensive synthesis of my interview, survey, and literature data to identify themes, gaps, and ultimately create the actionable recommendations and inclusive engagement strategies. All right, and here's an example of how I coded some of my interview transcripts. So how it works, or how coding kind of works. You are tagging key themes or patterns to easily analyze data. So I looked across, all the interviewee quotes and identified key terms that people continuously stated and found patterns there. So here's an example. I just highlighted a few of them, put them in a code. For this quote, identifying community leaders, spark plugs, folks who are really plugged in. They are a really great local champion to know what some of the hurdles are. So, and then another quote said, find the person the community trusts. So this cross-coding here is trust building. They're telling you like who to engage with to try to build trust with this community. And then the codes were community leaders, local champions, spark plugs. There are many, many more quotes, but we don't have the time to go through all of them to show you. But I promise there's multiple of these words used. And then I created the recommendation. So the recommendation here is to leverage established connections. And I created 3 actions for each recommendation. So one is to identify local ambassadors or community champions who can informally share updates and build trust at the grassroots level. All right, so I have another reflection prompt for you guys as we move into my inclusive engagement framework. So I'd love if you can think about a time when you felt genuinely included in a decision-making process. What made that experience meaningful or effective? I'll give you about 15 seconds, and then I won't be asking for feedback, but I just want you to kind of think about it and ground yourself in this mindset as we move into inclusive engagement. All right, we'll start. Thank you for coming here, guys, also. All right, about 15 seconds are up. Let's get into my framework for inclusive engagement. So here I created a step-by-step framework to help practitioners really understand that engagement is a continuous process and to help practitioners kind of step-by-step check in with themselves as they're doing a planning process for a community on wildfire mitigation, just to ensure that this is a successful outcome. And I really wanted to emphasize here that this is ongoing. So even when you reach step 6, this is the time to reflect, adapt, and iterate and start all over again. So communities have evolving needs. So then you'll kind of need to start the process over. Or if you're working with a new community, they'll have different needs. You need to learn how to adapt and work for that community. All right, so step 1 is ground in local context and positionality. So what is positionality? This is your identities, roles, potential biases, relationship dynamics. They shape experiences, power, privileges, essentially how you show up in this community and maybe like how, if you're in a position of power, compared to the community. Reflecting on that can help influence trust and participation in a positive way. Also looking into local context. So you can do this through an equity scan or demographic profiling, and this can be through mapping, age cohorts, income levels, linguistic diversity, home ownership status. Overall, this really helps identify those populations that are underserved by conventional outreach. This way you can include as many community members as possible. I wanted to start also in grounding local context and positionality because I think just knowing who you are and who the community is on a foundational level is very key in starting that planning process. Step 2 is to establish that initial trust through local connection. So research shows that community trust correlates with broader community engagement. One study found that when people trust their community's ability to work together and share resources, they're more likely to take action such as participation in wildfire mitigation. And also, the more the people work together, the stronger that trust becomes. Engagement often succeeds or fails depending on the credibility who delivers it. So that means you want to be in person to build that engagement so people can get to know you. And you can do so by attending community events, introducing yourself in person, and prioritizing informal dialogue. You should also look into those local intermediaries to help build trust. These are those informal community champions we're talking about earlier, who are essentially the long-term residents, local business owners, or they're the more formal people, such as fire chiefs or volunteer firefighters, who are really key in providing updates at town halls or informal gatherings. Okay, step 3 is design for accessibility and flexibility. So this is where practitioners should really use intentional designs so that they can include all community members in planning initiatives. This way, they can also accommodate community diversity. And they can do this by providing meetings in familiar places and information in multiple languages, for example. And overall, this helps reduce barriers to participation. These barriers look like transportation and access, unable to connect digitally. Maybe they don't speak the same language as the people running the community meeting. They might not be able to travel to the community meetings. And there's also time constraints, like maybe their job time conflicts when community meetings are occurring. Overall, participation barriers frequently exclude residents who are already marginalized. So it's very important to intentionally design to make this plan work for the community and not against. Okay, step 4, we have validate and use local knowledge. So here, there's a vital resource that's often overlooked in wildfire mitigation, and that is ecological knowledge rooted in lived experiences, cultural traditions, and indigenous practices. Sarah Kay right now is going over a really cool slide or presentation on indigenous work. So highly recommend checking out that recording. But this is super key because you could use, like local members might already have established defensible space measures and informal burn practices that could be a really powerful tool when you're trying to engage community members, because you already have that access, you already have that experience there that you could utilize. Also, research indicates that acknowledging place meanings and attachment can help shape how communities perceive environmental changes and risks in their region, including with wildfire. And you can do this through storytelling sessions, participatory mapping, co-created treatment plans, and community workshops. These all help foster collaboration and trust while integrating diverse perspectives. Step 5 is to ensure that you're really investing in those long-term relationships. So you've built that initial trust, you've grounded in local context, you've validated local knowledge. Now you want to ensure that these relationships are going to last long-term. And that is because wildfire engagement cannot be episodic, it must be continuous. A Colorado-based study found that while initial community interest in prescribed fire often stems from fear of wildfire, it can grow into curiosity, long-term landscape resilience, and overall sustained engagement when agencies emphasize transparency and relationship-based communication. Also, assigning community liaisons or wildfire ambassadors can help maintain consistent communication between residents and agencies. And these roles, they can really offer those updates, relay concerns, and monitor evolving community needs when the practitioners aren't there in person. Also, another study found that sustained collaboration is especially critical in landscapes dominated by private and mixed ownership. So the study really emphasized that wildfire mitigation efforts often falter when engagement remains short-term or program-driven, rather than built on enduring incentive-based relationships with private landowners. So overall, by investing in these long-term relationships, you're reducing community vulnerability while increasing community engagement. Finally, step 6, this is where I really want to emphasize that this is the time to reflect, adapt, and iterate. So you're near the end of your planning process, you're ready to potentially move on to a new community, or you're completing the project and you're thinking of the future ahead, and you have to come back and redo maybe a future CWPP. So you want to reflect and adapt on lessons learned and adjust engagement strategies. That's because there's always going to be evolving community needs, climate conditions, and wildfire regimes to check in and confirm and update your CWPP, right? And then again, like in the beginning, when I showed that circle on how this is continuous, this is an ongoing cycle of co-learning and improvement. Practitioners should always try to revisit goals and share lessons across communities, and then also evolve practices together to strengthen long-term resilience. All right, so I created a little game now for my next step. So this is my actionable recommendations. So now that you guys are experts, okay, in this field, thanks to what I've shared so far, of course. So I created this little game. How it works is we're just going to cover the first four, and then I'll do a little review at the end for the last four, since the last four are a little more straightforward. But these are essentially clear, experience-based best practices to guide future engagement in wildfire resilience building efforts. And again, like I mentioned earlier, these are recommendations, and then they each have 3 actionables that practitioners can do to accomplish them. However, we're just going to go over one each. So, how the game works. There's a recommendation at the top, which is leverage established connections in this case. And then I want you to decide which one is an action for this recommendation. I'll give you 15 seconds, and in that time, I'd love if you're willing and able to, raise your hand with either a 1 or a 2 to indicate which one you believe is the action. And then I'll go over why it is at the end. So I'll start. And if you're in the chat, please write 1 or 2. All right, awesome. Thank you. Ooh, is that really your answer? No, just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. No, those are good answers. They're good answers. Okay, it's 15 seconds. So you guys are right. Yeah, it's 2. So yeah, if you were paying attention to that coding example earlier, I kind of gave this one away a little bit, but I know you would have gotten it on your own too, of course. But you want to really identify those local ambassadors over having prioritized agency-led presentations, because community members are much more likely to listen to their fellow peers and community members than they are to someone who's just coming from outside the community and trying to tell you what to do, right? Some kind of federal agent. All right, next recommendation. Prioritize in-person engagement. So which one is an action for the recommendation? 1 is building trust starts with showing up and introducing yourself. 2 is building trust starts with providing detailed information on the project before personal introductions. So again, if you're willing and able, please raise your hand, 1 or 2. I'll give you 15 seconds, or in the chat, 1 or 2. I'll be nice this time, okay? Don't worry. Nice, I like it. Awesome. All right, the correct answer is 1. Great job, guys. So that is because across all the interviewees, they were stating how building trust really just shows up with when you show up and introduce yourself. When people can recognize your face and see you at events, then they're more likely to build trust there than if you were to just come in and just tell them what to do, right? Just provide that information first. They want to know who you are first. All right. So next we have include all voices. So again, which one is the action? 1 is focus on aligning community perspectives with project goals to maintain efficiency. And 2 is allow time to listen and incorporate diverse perspectives in decision-making, including those that differ significantly from your own. No, I'll be nice. Okay, guys. I'm sorry. All right. Yeah, let's go choose. Yay. Yes, so exactly. We want those diverse perspectives. And that's because, you never know if your answer is always going to be the correct one. Who knows? Like maybe someone else has a better idea that actually works best for this community. So it's always good to include diverse perspectives, even if they differ significantly from your own. And also, you never want to try to align community perspectives only. You got to include those diverse perspectives as well. Because again, they could have a better outcome. All right, finally, the last question. The recommendation is engage early and set clear expectations. So 1 is gather resident feedback after goals are set to refine outreach strategies. 2 is involve residents in shaping project goals from the outset instead of presenting finalized plans. Which one is the action? Give you 15 seconds. See some hesitant faces. I know you guys got this. All right, it is 2. Yeah, great job, guys. So yes, when you're engaging early, you want to make sure that you're including residents from the get-go and not just presenting finalized plans right off the bat, right? Yeah. All right, so those were just one action of those first 4. For the last 4, we have use accessible jargon-free language. So the first action I have here is replace technical terms and acronyms. So for example, instead of CWPP, you want to say Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And I know this might seem a little obvious. However, practitioners often forget that, community members don't understand these acronyms because they get so used to using them. So it's just good to keep in mind to try to spell out these words in case there's someone new here. Next, we have provide inclusive training and collaboration. So the first action I have here is offer both in-person and virtual training options, along with translation services and food to boost participation. This is just so that, you want to make sure that everyone is able to join if possible by providing those virtual and in-person options. And then those incentives help encourage people to come to a community event they might not think is as important, or they might not even know that it affects them, until they're there. Next, we have conduct thoughtful community-centered surveys. So here, the first one is might seem pretty simple, but it's to review previous survey results before designing new ones. So a lot of community members expressed in these in-person workshops that they have survey fatigue. So that's basically they're being asked the same questions over and over again, and they're tired of it. Like new practitioners come in and just do the same things. So I think it's helpful to just check in, see if there already are surveys out there that were completed, because this might save you time on having to ask those questions. And then also, you'll build more trust there with the community since you've respected that they've done those surveys before. All right. Finally, we have match projects to community capacity. So the first action I have here is to scale initiatives based on local capacity, volunteer availability, funding cycles, and seasonal constraints. So here is essentially, you just want to make sure you're not running out of funding before you complete the project. And this way, you're coming off as more reliable to community members, and you're showing that you've done that intentional design, right? Like I mentioned earlier. All right, I have I feel like this quote kind of summarizes pretty much everything, even though it's very short, but I just love it because it's all about that person-to-person connection. So fundamentally, it just starts with connecting with people on a person-to-person level. I can't emphasize this enough, how important this is in wildfire communication or mitigation. Before joining CLTL and doing this capstone, I didn't realize how people forward conservation was. So this is profound to me, and I just love it. It really is down to those people connections. All right, it's a little on my overall reflections of my capstone and my CL experience. So the first is conservation begins with connection. This kind of goes back to what I was just talking about, that person-to-person level, how throughout my graduate program, I really learned that conservation is ultimately a people problem, right, Dawson? Yeah. So wildfire resilience really isn't achieved through science alone. It really depends on that trust, relationships, and belonging. I also learned that collaboration demands courage and shared responsibility. So working alongside my diverse peers, that's really taught me that it's not just about coordination, it's about commitment. Often at the very start of the program, I struggle to share and be more vulnerable with my peers because you guys are just so awesome. And I don't know, I felt intimidated at the start, but I learned, and that's honestly one of my biggest regrets, is not sharing more, getting to share myself more and also learn from you guys in that sense, because I feel like whenever someone contributes something, everyone learns something, right? It really demands courage and consistency. And I think if anyone's watching from the new CL cohort, I really suggest that you do speak up and say something, because that's truly one of my biggest regrets, is not sharing enough. And then finally, reflection fuels growth and resilience. So across this program, reflection has been my most powerful tool. It's again that positionality, checking in with yourself, who you are as a leader, how you present yourself, how you engage with community members is super key. So I really think that helps you grow as both a conservation and wildfire practitioner and just as a person in total. All right, and then I have some key takeaways for you guys, just kind of overall summaries. So first is inclusive engagement is essential for long-term wildfire resilience. As I've discussed over and over, this is a continuous process, right? So it really requires that time to listen and value community of diverse voices. You gotta incorporate those multiple perspectives. Planning becomes true partnership and resilience grows as a shared effort shaped by everyone involved. Secondly, I have wildfire resilience begins with hi, my name is. So it's really about those first introductions, showing up, getting to know people, figuring out their values, their needs, and how you're able to adapt, support everyone, and create a lasting impact for both the people and the landscapes involved. And then I'd love if people could just think on this quote as you leave this presentation today. So what's one commitment that you could do to strengthen authentic engagement in your work? Maybe you want to meet a coworker that you never talked with before, because who knows, this could really change your whole work dynamic in a positive way. Finally, I just want to say thank you to the Ember Alliance, or EKT, and the Conservation Leadership Program. I provided a little QR code here on the Ember Alliance if you're curious to learn more about this nonprofit that really helps communities live alongside fire. And then I also have a QR code to learn about the Indigenous lands you reside on, because I think it's just very important to acknowledge that, especially being a part of a community, it's good to acknowledge the lands that you live on too. And that's everything.